Okay, let's dive in. We're looking today at, well, one of the absolute marvels of engineering, something strategically vital even now, the Panama Canal. Just try to picture this.
Yeah.
You have a ship, right? A massive one, carrying maybe 14,000 standard shipping containers. It's huge, displacing water like, I don't know, 60,000 pickup trucks. And you need to lift this thing, lift it basically the height of an 8-story building. And you need to do that reliably, like 30, 40 times every single day. And here's the kicker. Mostly using just gravity and water.
It really is an astonishing piece of work, a kind of mechanical ballet. And, while the engineering itself is incredible, what makes this deep dive so relevant now is that this century-old structure is suddenly right back in the thick of global power struggles. We've heard some pretty loud talk recently, especially in the U.S., about maybe reclaiming the canal.
Right, reclaiming it. Despite the fact that the U.S. officially handed over complete control sovereignty to Panama back in 1999, that's, what, nearly a quarter century ago now?
Exactly. And that rhetoric, it usually centers on claims of foreign influence. Specifically, there's talk about rivals, particularly companies linked to China, getting involved.
And that talk, it functions as a pretty clear signal, doesn't it? It suggests the U.S. feels it still has the right to, well, dominate or step in if its strategic interests are threatened. Treaties or no treaties?
That's the underlying message, yes. No. So our mission today is to go, way beyond just the basics. We really need to understand not just the physics, how the canal actually works, but also the staggering human costs, the global workforce that literally carved this thing out of the jungle. We'll look at the long and often bloody fight for Panamanian sovereignty, the trauma around the handover itself, and how these current geopolitical winds, plus, crucially, internal problems like corruption, are really pressuring Panama today.
Yeah, so this deep dive, it gives you a real insight into the hidden mechanics of the global economy, naval strategy, and also just how fragile national sovereignty can be when a small country controls something indispensable to world powers. This little 50-mile strip of land, it's like the invisible heart pumping the lifeblood of global trade. So let's start right where the ships do, facing that huge climb.
Okay, so to really get the genius of the canal, you first have to grasp the geography problem it solved. I mean, before this thing existed, sailing from the Atlantic to the Pacific, that was a monster journey.
Right, you had to go all the way down around the tip of South America. Thousands of extra miles.
Thousands, and often through absolutely treacherous weather around Cape Horn or the Strait of Magellan. Incredibly dangerous, incredibly time-consuming.
So the canal obviously solves the distance issue, but it introduces this, well, you called it an engineering nightmare earlier. It's not flat like Suez, is it?
Not at all. Panama is mountainous, rugged. You've got the Continental Divide running right through it. So when a ship arrives from the ocean, it can't just sail straight across at sea level. It has to be lifted.
How high are we talking?
About 26 meters, which is roughly 85 feet.
Yeah.
That's the elevation needed to get over those central highlands.
85 feet. That's like an 8-story building, you said. And you can't just, build a giant crane for a ship that weighs tens of thousands of tons.
Exactly. So the solution was the lock system. Essentially a series of massive concrete chambers that act like water elevators. The ships, and today we're talking these huge Neo-Panamax vessels carrying, like you said, 14,000 or more containers, they sail into a locked chamber.
Okay.
Giant steel gates close behind them. Then, water is let into the chamber from the level above purely by gravity. The chamber fills, and the ship just floats up.
It just floats up. Using water pressure alone, no massive pumps involved?
Primarily gravity and water flow for lifting, yes. It's hydrostatic pressure doing the work. The pumps are more involved in managing the water and the newer lock systems. But the fundamental lift comes from letting water flow downhill.
It's easy to just watch a time-lapse video and kind of miss the sheer volume of water involved in that process.
It's immense. The ship enters, the gates close, and then valves open in these huge tunnels called culverts, built right into the lock walls and floor. We're not talking small pipes here.
How big are these culverts?
Big enough to drive a train through, apparently.
Yeah.
They're massive conduits. And when those valves open, water floods in incredibly fast. It takes maybe 8 to 15 minutes or so to fill one of these chambers.
Wow. And how much water are we talking per lift?
For the original locks, it was something like 52 million gallons of fresh water for each chamber transit.
52 million gallons per ship, essentially. Where did all that fresh water come from? That sounds like a huge amount.
And that brings us to the real game changer, the key engineering decision that made the American project succeed where the French failed. Instead of trying the incredibly difficult, maybe impossible at the time, task of digging the whole thing down to sea level through mountains.
Which is what the French initially wanted, right?
Yes, de Lesseps' initial vision. The Americans, learning from that, decided to dam the Chagres River, a major river flowing through the area. This dam created an enormous artificial lake, Gatún Lake, which sits at that 85-foot elevation above sea level.
So that's the secret ingredient. It's not all a narrow, dugout canal.
Not at all. That's what people often miss. More than half the journey, about 24 miles, is actually the ship sailing across this huge man-made lake. The lake itself is the main channel for a large part of the crossing.
That's fascinating. So the locks lift ships up to the lake level.
Precisely. Ships get lifted up on the Atlantic side, sail across Gatún Lake, then navigate through the narrower high part called the Gaillard Cut, which was blasted through the mountains, and then they descend through another set of locks on the Pacific side back down to sea level.
Okay, that makes sense. But managing the flow of these giant ships, especially now with the bigger ones, must be incredibly complex, the coordination needed.
It's an incredibly intricate dance, yeah. You have the original locks, which define the standard Panamax ship size for a century. But then global shipping changed, ships got way bigger.
Which led to the expansion project.
Exactly. In 2016, they opened a whole new, wider set of locks, the Neo-Panamax locks, specifically designed for these modern supercarriers. And that required even more advanced engineering.
What was the main innovation there? Just making them bigger?
Bigger, yes, significantly wider and deeper. But also, crucially, more water efficient. Because remember, the whole system relies on the fresh water in Gatún Lake, using 52 million gallons per transit, multiple times a day. That's a massive drain on the country's water resources, especially with climate change concerns now.
Right, droughts could become a serious issue.
They already are, at times. So the new Neo-Panamax locks were designed with these ingenious water-saving basins alongside the main chambers.
Water-saving basins? How do they work?
Basically, as water is emptied from a lock chamber to lower a ship, instead of it all flowing out to sea, about 60% of it is directed into these basins. Then, that captured water can be reused for the next ship coming up. It drastically reduces the net amount of fresh water drawn from the lake for each transit.
That's incredibly clever, adapting century-old infrastructure with modern conservation techniques.
It was essential for the canal's future viability. And when everything is running smoothly, the Canal Authority manages this astonishing rhythm, like you said, pushing 30 to 40 massive vessels through this precise system every single day. It really is the constant pulse of the global supply chain made visible.
And that modern flow, that intricate logistics operation, it actually builds on centuries of history, doesn't it? This narrow strip of land has always been a key pathway.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Long before anyone dreamed of a canal, this isthmus was recognized as strategic. Back in the 16th century, the Spanish realized its importance almost immediately. They set up a route, the Camino Real, the Royal Road, to transport all the gold and silver they were extracting from the Pacific side, mainly Peru, across the isthmus to the Atlantic, so they could ship it back to Spain.
And that wasn't entirely overland, was it? Didn't they use the rivers?
Partly. They used the Chagres River, the same river later dammed, to create Gatún Lake for part of the journey. Smaller boats could navigate partway upriver. Then, goods and people would transfer to mules or foot for the rest of the way over the hills.
And this transit function, that's what really fueled the growth of Panama City from early on, right? Establishing it as this global crossroads.
Definitely. It made Panama City a vital hub, linking Europe and the Americas, though often, at tremendous cost to the indigenous populations and the enslaved laborers brought in.
So the value of this spot was known for centuries. Then comes the Industrial Revolution, global trade explodes, and the French step in.
Right. Late 1800s. The idea of a canal becomes technologically conceivable, or so they thought. And the man of the hour was Ferdinand de Lesseps.
The hero of the Suez Canal.
Exactly. He had this immense prestige from Suez, which was a phenomenal success. He came to Panama brimming with confidence, maybe a bit of hubris, thinking he could just replicate the Suez model, a sea-level canal, basically digging a straight trench.
But Panama's jungle is not Egypt's desert.
Not even close.
Yeah.
The project turned into an absolute catastrophe. Financially, yes, but more importantly, humanly. The tropical environment was brutal. And the biggest single killer, mosquitoes.
Carrying malaria and yellow fever?
Yes. And the scientific understanding of how those diseases spread, that link to mosquitoes, wasn't really locked down or widely accepted yet. So they had no effective way to combat it.
The death toll from that French attempt is just staggering to think about.
It's horrific. Our sources suggest that over the roughly 8 years the French were actively working on it, they brought in tens of thousands of workers, mostly from the Caribbean, but also Europe and elsewhere. And the estimates are that something like 22,000 of them died.
22,000 people. Mostly from disease, but also accidents in that incredibly difficult terrain.
Yes. The jungle basically swallowed the project, along with countless lives and a fortune in investment. The French company went bankrupt. The project was abandoned in 1889, just littered with rusting equipment and unmarked graves.
And that colossal failure, that vacuum, is where the United States saw its opportunity.
Precisely. Early 1900s. The U.S. is rapidly expanding, becoming a global power. They realized that having a two-ocean navy, being able to move ships quickly between the Atlantic and Pacific, was essential for projecting that power. And this isthmus was the key.
So they eyed the prize. But Panama was part of Colombia then. How did the U.S. navigate that?
With a combination of, let's say, strategic diplomacy and implied force, Panama had its own separatist movements battling up against Colombian rule. The U.S. saw an opening.
They essentially backed Panama's independence movement.
They did. In 1903, the U.S. provided crucial naval support, preventing Colombian troops from landing to quash the rebellion. Panama declared independence, and literally days later,
A deal was struck.
The brand new Panamanian government, likely under considerable pressure and perhaps not fully realizing the long-term implications, signed the Hay-Buenos-Varela Treaty. This treaty granted the United States rights in perpetuity to a 10-mile wide strip of land across the isthmus, the Canal Zone, in exchange for a one-time payment and small annual payments. The U.S. essentially engineered a separation to secure the land it needed.
So the U.S. gets control of the zone, and now they have to actually build the canal. They learned from the French failure, adopting the lock system instead of sea level, but they still needed workers, lots of them.
A massive labor force, just like the French, and again they recruited internationally. The construction phase, roughly 1904 to 1914, brought another huge wave of migration that fundamentally reshaped Panama's demographics.
Where did they come from this time?
All over. A huge contingent from the Caribbean, especially Barbados, Jamaica, Martinique, but also workers from Spain, Italy, Greece, even some from Ireland, China, India. It was a truly global effort.
Drawn by the promise of work, but facing, again, really harsh conditions.
Absolutely. Yeah. Under the American administration, there were very strict racial and pay hierarchies in place from the start. But this time, crucially, the U.S. did understand the mosquito problem. Thanks to Walter Reed and Carlos Finlay's work, they implemented massive sanitation campaigns,
which drastically reduced the death rates from yellow fever and malaria compared to the French era. Still dangerous work, but not the same level of disease catastrophe.
Right. It was still incredibly tough, dangerous work, and thousands still died from accidents and other illnesses. But the disease control was key to the American success. This global workforce built the canal, forever changing Panama, and when it opened in 1914, just before World War I, it instantly amplified U.S. power on the world stage. #Tag3, the Panama Canal Zone, and the price of division. Okay, so the canal's built, it's operating, and the U.S. cements its control through this entity called the Panama Canal Zone, that 10-mile wide, 50-mile long strip of territory. And the way the zone was mapped out, it was one of the strangest and, for Panamanians, most insulting territorial arrangements you could imagine.
Yeah, the map itself tells a story, doesn't it? It wasn't just a straight corridor. It carved things up in really awkward ways.
Totally. It was drawn purely for American convenience and control, completely ignoring the existing cities and how Panama actually functioned. It ran right through the heart of the country, cutting it in two, physically and culturally.
And what about Panama City, the historic hub?
That's one of the weirdest parts. Panama City, which had been the center of Isthmian transit for centuries, was specifically excluded from the zone. It remained Panamanian territory, but it was now sort of walled off from the canal itself, the very thing that had defined its existence. Its main economic engine was now foreign territory right next door.
And on the other side, the Atlantic side, Colón.
Colón faced the opposite problem. The city itself remained technically Panamanian, but it became completely surrounded by the canal zone. An island of Panamanian territory within this American-controlled strip. It was bizarre.
So the U.S. essentially created this massive, self-contained entity stretching across the country, like a giant company town.
Exactly. It was owned and operated entirely by the U.S. federal government through the Panama Canal Company. And it wasn't just docks and locks. It was a whole transplanted American world. Think manicured lawns, Standardized houses, commissaries selling American goods, schools teaching an American curriculum, movie theaters showing Hollywood films, bowling alleys, swimming pools.
All the trappings of American suburban life from that era.
Right. But crucially, it was governed by American laws, policed by American forces, and operated under a strict system of segregation.
Yes, the gold roll and silver roll system. That was central to how the zone functioned, wasn't it?
Absolutely fundamental. It was essentially a racial and national hierarchy encoded in the payroll. The gold roll was for U.S. citizens, almost exclusively white Americans and some skilled Northern Europeans. They got paid in U.S. dollars, had the best housing, better schools, access to the prime facilities.
And the silver roll.
That was for everyone else. The vast majority of the workforce, Panamanians, West Indians, other Latin Americans, Asians, they were paid less, often in local currency or silver equivalents, lived in inferior housing, often in separate, less desirable areas, and faced discrimination in jobs and access to amenities.
So it baked in this idea of Panamanians and other non-Americans as second-class citizens within this strip of their own country. You can see how that would build resentment over decades.
Deep resentment. It was a constant, visible reminder of inequality and foreign control.
And inside this bubble, this unique environment, you had the emergence of the Zonians?
Yes, the Zonians. This fascinating subculture. These were the people, mostly Americans, whose entire lives and identities were tied to the Canal Zone. Many families lived there for generations, 2, 3, even 4 generations.
So they weren't just temporary workers, it was home.
It was absolutely home. Their community was tight-knit, centered around the canal's operation, the schools, the social life within the zone. But it created this really complex identity. They were American citizens, but many had never lived on the U.S. mainland or felt fully connected to it. Yet, outside the zone, in Panama City or Colon, they were clearly seen as foreigners, as gringos. They existed in this kind of in-between space.
Tied to the physical place of the Canal Zone itself.
Profoundly. There's that anecdote you mentioned about the Zonian whose grandmother was born in a town that was literally flooded and excavated to build the canal. Decades later, the grandchild throws the grandmother's ashes into the Guillard Cut, the big trench.
Because that was their ancestral place, in a way, the canal excavation itself.
Exactly. For many Zonians, the canal wasn't just infrastructure. It was their history, their landscape, their identity, which meant that when the idea of handing the zone back to Panama started gaining serious traction later on.
It wasn't just a geopolitical issue for them. It was deeply personal, existential even.
Absolutely. It was the potential erasure of their entire world. And that perspective, while understandable on a human level, was often completely disconnected from the Panamanian experience of the zone as an occupying force. #Tag4. The long, bloody road to sovereignty, 1964-1999.